Even this morning, we heard complaints about the level of awareness. That's only the first step. Awareness is not enough. What we need as we move forward is a sense of belonging. People who feel that they're not just Thais, Cambodians, Malaysians, but they're also the peoples of ASEAN. And they will only feel that if they feel that we are all in this together and we have some kind of common values. The blueprint, or should I say blueprints, because there have now been two, of the ASEAN socio-cultural community explicitly states one of the goals of this community to be the building of an ASEAN identity. It's, of course, accompanied by other objectives, which are all very, very valid, especially in these times, because they talk about the issue of rights, the issue of welfare, the issue of the environment, the issue of equity, and the issue of governance. But when we assess the progress we make on all these issues, what we discover is that we may say that we have made satisfactory progress, but it would be hard to argue that they were the results of ASEAN. They were more the results of individual, national, or domestic governments pursuing those programs. And much more important, nobody really sees what are the principles that underpin ASEAN action in moving towards these objectives. That's why it's so difficult to create this sense of belonging as far as people are concerned in ASEAN. And this is made all the more visible when we have some key regional problems, but people don't really see an ASEAN response. The Rohingyans, the haze problem, which happens year in, year out. Not many people see an ASEAN response to what are essentially also ASEAN problems. So what do we have to do? Well, let me digress a little and say we should learn something from the European Union. I say learn, not copy. Because I know that the Europeans and the West have always viewed ASEAN as a very unambitious program. They didn't understand that all the Gulf, the durians was really about trust building. They always asked me when I was Prime Minister, why is ASEAN so unambitious? Why are we not going for a common currency? And then after the crisis in Europe, they never asked me anymore. They think that we have not been able to go far enough to fulfill our potential as a grouping. They do have a point. But what strikes me as the most important lessons from the European Union are two recent events in the European Union. The first was when they were struck with the crisis in Greece and other countries. The most important lesson that I learned from that wasn't about the economics. It was about this. How was it that the Europeans were so determined to keep the Union together despite the burden placed on them? The Greeks had to tolerate a cut in the budget of about 50%. The Germans, the creditors, had to put up taxpayers' money to keep some of the banks alive, all because they wanted the Union to remain intact. That's a sense of belonging. Now imagine if something similar happened in ASEAN. Are we as committed to ASEAN as the Europeans had been? And I asked some of my European colleagues, why are you so determined? Is it because you want to be competitive economically or what? And the answers I got were quite surprising. They said no, it was all about the fact that they feel the European Union is the best guarantee of peace, of stability, and that they feel that with common principles and values, they now have a global voice. The values, of course, are all about democracy, human rights, environmental protection, and so on. That's the value of the union or the community to the Europeans. We should learn from that. The second lesson is, why did Brexit happen? I must say that when people were speculating that there would be Grexit, that's Greece leaving because they couldn't bear all the adjustment programs, I had always argued that Brexit was more likely. Why did I say that? Because I spent about 10 years in Britain. And I've always felt that the British never really felt they belonged to continental Europe. They thought they were different. Actually, they thought they were better. And that's reflected in the voting of the old generations in the Brexit referendum. Somehow they were not able to integrate themselves fully into Europe. They're not part of Schengen, they're not part of the euro, and so on. The lesson we take from that is, for a sustained integration arrangement to be successful, you have to create this sense of belonging. That's the key. For the British, the resentment is that everything was being dictated from Brussels. Unaccountable, what they see as bureaucracy. And it's odd, because the European Union actually has a European Parliament. One of my favorite exercises when I meet somebody from Europe is, can you name your local member of European Parliament? I don't think I've met one person who can. There is a disconnect. ASEAN must learn from that, because sooner or later, ASEAN people will not accept ASEAN to continue to be run by a group of politicians and bureaucrats. The people must participate. We now, therefore, as we move on, have to do three things. Number one, we have to make ASEAN produce benefits that are tangible and people-centered. This morning we had a member from the media who suggested little things like car registration numbers and so on. These are the kinds of things that may not add up too much numerically, but will be significant in the minds of ASEAN people. Secondly, we must increase people's participation. It was mentioned earlier this morning, during my time as chairman, we had invited civil society, youth, members of parliament to have an interactive session, although a limited one, with leaders at the summit. It's a pity that that's no longer the practice. And when I was chairman, I was always struck that while we call ourselves as one, whenever we had dialogues with others, it was always 10 individual statements from the ASEAN countries, which meant the meetings were very, very, very long. I'm glad to hear over lunch that that's going to be changed. So when we have an ASEAN-China summit, there should be one person speaking for ASEAN and one person speaking for China. But it's taken us so long. So what are the suggestions? 2 suggestions, and they all revolve around what I call the ASEAN way. A debate that has haunted my whole political career. We always debate about whether it's good or whether it's bad. We don't even have a definition for it, but there is something there. Even this morning, we heard both people saying, don't apologize for the ASEAN way, and we heard somebody saying, get rid of the ASEAN way. Well, my suggestion is this. First, the ASEAN way should point the way to how we do things, the process. And I think our success in the past, in terms of the ASEAN way, which means informality, which means mutual respect, which means trust building, have enabled us to do things other people couldn't, like helping Myanmar with her transition to democracy, like allowing much of ASEAN centrality, because not just trust among ourselves, but outside powers trusted us to provide that centrality in so many international forums. But it has to be adapted. We can't just say everything has to go by consensus. We can remain informal, pragmatic, but become more decisive. Over lunch, I even suggested that that's easier now with technology. You know, well, for instance, we should first of all have ASEAN ministers in all cabinets in the 10 countries. And they should set up a line group or Viber group and talk to each other behind closed doors, as it were. So they don't have to have the pressure of public meetings and media attention and so on. That's the kind of thing that will help point the way forward. But the key is we have to increase participation. The agenda should no longer be driven by bureaucrats, politicians, and with due respect, not even with research institutes. It has to be an agenda for the people. And that will allow people to become involved, businesses, media, civil society, youth, parliamentarians, ordinary people. They must be all part of the process. We have to correct what I would call the democracy deficit in ASEAN. Secondly, we have to look for an ASEAN identity. And again, there's something about the ASEAN way. The ASEAN way now meaning the way ASEAN people conduct themselves. If we feel that we do not have to follow or adopt Western concepts, Western values, why not develop some of our own? When we talk about inequality, when we talk about justice, when we talk about rights, we could use our own language, that we are a giving community, a caring community, which is very much in line with our culture. And given our economic strength, isn't it time we stood up as a region? We could stand up to the big IT companies that are exploiting our size in not paying taxes, in not paying their fair share. But if we act as one to address what is going to be the biggest problem for decades to come, which is inequality, by standing up as a group, not only will we be doing a service to the global economy and globalization, we will also have demonstrated that ASEAN really matters to ASEAN people. We could come up with alternative models of development. I think of His late Majesty's efficiency economy as one possible concept. I think about the principles of Islamic financing being part of our alternative model. All this, however, will require both top-down and bottom-up. I've already emphasized the need for more participation from ordinary people, but none of it will be possible without leadership from the top. Remember, without our founding fathers, ASEAN wouldn't be here today. And we now need courageous, visionary, and innovative leadership within the region to lead this forward, so that if in 50 years' time I'm still alive, I can be proud of ASEAN at 100. Thank you.
Thank you very much.